So I put out yesterday, I tweeted to him, I said, what's it surging to and what's it surging
Richard
from?
Tice, for the people
Richard
who
Tice,
like
well, how many members do you have? Guess what the answer's been?
None?
None answer. No answer at all.
Yeah.
No answer from anybody at the Reform Party will tell you how many members they've got, because it's all, and I use my words very carefully, it's all BS.
Now, though, very excitingly, it's time for this.
Meet the Cerberus of columnists, the Janus of journalism, and the ultimate political portmanteau of opinion.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Finkelvitch, with Daniel Finkelstein and David Aaronovitch on Times Radio.
Yes, and they're both here. They're in the studio. For what we think the third time ever.
It's the third time I've ever been in, but I think one of the times I came in, Danny wasn't here, so...
Oh, yes, I think you're right. It's twice. Yeah. Wow. Anyway, morning, David.
Good morning.
I can't concentrate on you without seeing all of your gubbins in the background.
They're called books. Gubbins.
Morning, Danny. Nice to see you both here.
I'll teach you something nice today.
I know, exactly. I know. Thank you so much for coming. It's really lovely to see you. Right, let's talk about Rishi Sunak and his private GP. Does it matter if the Prime Minister has a private GP and doesn't use an NHS one, Danny?
So there are two questions here. Does it matter to me and does it matter politically? So to me, it doesn't matter. There are lots of things that members of Parliament, by necessity don't experience that other voters will experience. They may not have university-aged children, and yet they're running the university system. They may not have been convicted of crime, yet they're running the criminal system. So I don't think that the fact that they experience something that differently to other people really makes sense as a criticism. For me, it doesn't matter. Politically, I think it probably will matter, particularly for Conservative. I think. It'll matter at the margin when you look at what's happening to the economy at the moment, and you look at the problems the Conservative Party's got more broadly. I suspect it will not be the biggest difficulty that Rishi Sunak faces, but I think it will matter politically a bit. You've got to say that people will have two different reactions. So some people will be bothered with it. Some people will make that as an accusation. Quite a lot of people will have the same reaction that I do, which is they don't really mind if he does those things. And I've often wondered how much this kind of, you're rich, you're therefore out of touch attack really works. It has two elements to it. It works in the sense that people are concerned about him being in touch and they don't like the fact that he's out of touch. But it also makes the people who say it look as though they kind of don't like success, for example. And that's not a good look for them either. So, however much you can argue about that if you get into details. So I'm not sure it's a total hit on him, but I suspect politically it won't be an advantage.
David, it's partly, he'd probably get away with paying £250 for a same-day appointment if everyone else could get a GP appointment with the NHS. That actually, if the NHS was running pretty well, the people would mind less.
Well, I had a discussion about this a couple of weeks ago. Does Rishi Sunak have private health insurance? And the person I was talking to said, well, no, probably not, because he doesn't need to insure, because he's so rich, he can just buy it when he needs it. I'm not joking. You just do it on the spot. If you want to buy most of the healthcare that you need quickly in this country, you can do it if you've got the money to do it. The problem comes exactly in the way that you're suggesting. Not that people would expect anything else of somebody as wealthy as him, because they all would think, if I was as wealthy as him, I would probably do the same thing. It's one of the things that kind of goes with it. There will be a few people who don't feel like that, but most will. But we are facing such a terrible crisis in the NHS at the moment. I mean, just all the stories you hear from all your friends and so on, trying to do various things within the NHS and so on. Of course, you hear the bad stories. The good stories you tend not to hear. But nevertheless, there are so many of them. I have a friend whose son has a benign brain tumour, trying to get appointments. You get to the appointments, the notes have been lost, the thing has to be cancelled. You then finally get down to a telephone consultation, which is paid for sometime in February. And meanwhile, if you've got the money, you could buy that consultation, you could have it next week, and everybody knows it. So it is that kind of difficulty. But I don't think what Sunak himself does particularly plays into it. I mean, people will grumble about it.
Because actually, the big political problem is that the NHS is in a mess.
Yes,
really.
but some of that is definitely financial, but on the other hand, we're spending a lot of money on the National Health Service already, and we're putting up taxes on everything a lot. So the question is, how much more money can we spend? And some of it isn't financial. You know, people don't lose the notes because they haven't got enough money. That's an organisational failure. And you know, I think before we sort of say, you know, everybody ought to be able to have you know, I've just gone through exactly this experience of not being able to have a GP appointment soon when I wanted one soon. You know, it's going to take me more like 2.5 weeks to have one. And, you know, I'm sort of upset about it. But on the other hand, I recognise as a society, we're putting in an awful lot of money. How much more money are we going to put in? Yeah. Well, and because so many more things are available for conditions of which, you know, the one that I'm consulting my GP about, my grandfather died of, right? People don't die of it. So they live longer and they need more treatment. We need, therefore, more money. And at a certain point, we have to decide how much money we really can put into a system like that.
Well, I mean, you've generalised the point a bit, Danny. I mean, the French, for example, spend 20% more on health than we do, on the health service than we do. And then there are other kind of specific choke points. We know about the specific problems of social care, meaning that you have bed blocking and that leads to the ambulance blocking and so on. And then you have the longer term problem of absolutely disastrous decisions taken in staff planning going forward and so on, which is actually the biggest choke point we have at all at the moment, which is staffing. And all these things combine to make it a series of a huge problem right at the moment. But going back to the kind of the other point of, if it's going well, you don't begrudge the Prime Minister his £250 an appointment GP. If it's going really badly, it becomes part of a very obvious sort of grumble and counterpoint, which won't work for him.
The French are putting, there are countries that are putting in more and countries that are putting less, but are we contemplating putting 20% more of our resources into the National Health Service at the moment? Not 20% of our resources, 20% more resources into the NHS.
Well, maybe if we want the kind of health service that we claim to want, it may be that we have to try and do that. Okay. And we have to make that priority. I mean, there are other things that we can do. As we know, there are huge possibilities of technological advances and innovations which could solve, I mean, some of our problems are diagnostic problems. We have very blunt diagnosis for a whole lot of diseases and so on. We could improve that substantially over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. And it may be that you need a bit of a reorganisation in order to allow the NHS, which is a very big organisation, to innovate. But that will still, in the short term, cost you significant amounts of money to get done.
I mean, I was going to say move on, but actually it sort of flows from this, because we were talking about staffing is clearly a massive problem. Keir Starmer's recently talked about how he wants to rely less on foreign doctors and nurses to come in and staff the NHS, because he wants to, and he's been talking this morning about weaning ourselves off immigration dependency. But all that takes time to train up our own doctors and nurses, and all that takes money, and we don't have either of those. We don't have either time or money.
Well, we also have an ageing population, so we should be relatively clear about this. Unless we are actually going to do much better at retaining older people and retraining older people within the system, then in that case we're always going to be immigration dependent, or for the foreseeable future, because we're just not making enough people to replace the ones who are leaving.
I think there is a case, having asked the questions, David, I'll try and answer it myself. I think there is a case for putting more money in the NHS, but I think I'd only be comfortable if I felt that it would lead to greater productivity and that the money would then be well spent. It wouldn't. I mean, there are parts of the NHS where wages are underfunded, and you can put more money into that, but you wouldn't want to merely put that into higher salaries, and you'd also want to, and you don't want to obviously fund paper shuffling going round faster. Yeah. I think I regard the National Health Service and the provision of it as both sort of economically essential and a great thing for the country to have, and we're also very politically committed to it as a country. I'm not against doing it, but we are spending an awful lot of money on it already, is the point, and there are big consequences to raising even higher the amount of money we're spending on it. So if we're going to do that, we really need to make sure that it's spent on something that you actually get in return.
Craig's just been in touch, saying Sunak can't win. He's going to grieve for his family having private healthcare. Imagine they were using the NHS. He'll be wise, his rich non-dom wife clogging up the NHS, which is a good point. It's a good point. Now, Bill has got in touch with a question for you both, which I thought was interesting. Will there be a new Brexit party formed by disappointed Tory MPs and others? Could such a party do well without Nigel Farage?
Well, I love this quote. At the moment, the leader of the Reform Party and GB News, which has effectively become the kind of Reform Party's own official organ, are doing great stuff on how Sunak is not a real Tory and the Reform Party is going to get all the votes from the real Tories, etc. It's going to be hard on immigration, etc., but also very kind of trade liberalising and low tax. In other words, one of these kind of impossible combinations, which Farage represents in his kind of broader sense. Which is why, incidentally, in his broader sense, he never really attracted many votes. And they've got this kind of big thing, which is we're going to have this new party, the Reform Party is going to be it, and it's going to take over from the Conservative and lead a kind of insurgency. Or if it doesn't do that, it's at least going to take 10% off the Tories, and that means the Tories will have to be like us anyway in order to get that kind of 10% back. And it's going on and on about how big surge in membership. So I put out yesterday, I tweeted to him, I said, what's it surging to and what's it surging
Richard
from?
Tice, for the people
Richard
who
Tice,
aren't
well, how many members do you have? Guess what the answer's been?
None?
None answer. No answer at all.
Yeah.
No answer from anybody at the Reform Party will tell you how many members they've got because it's all, and I use my words very carefully, it's all BS.
But also, is what I enjoyed was this was a response to a claim they'd had their second highest day in November.
Yes.
On what was it, the 21st of November?
Can a party, of to the right of the Conservative Party, take a chunk of the vote? Absolutely, it can. They've shown that before. They can do it again. They might be able to win a handful of seats. They can certainly deny the rest of the Conservative Party the chance to form a government, or indeed undermine it significantly so that it loses vast numbers of seats. The gainer of which will be Labour in the electoral system that we have. Canada, they did this absolutely. Preston Manning created a Reform Party. They undermined the Conservative vote. The Progressive Conservatives collapsed. It took them 15 years, and eventually they all got back together again, forming, I think, the Conservative Progressives or something like that. And they were only able to get back into power through that system, because ultimately political parties, we've had this discussion before, because David's questioned me on, why do I want to be part of the Conservative Party? And the answer is, in a two-party system, you need to have a broad coalition and all the parts in it have to take a degree of responsibility for each other, and they all have to make compromises with each other. If people like Richard Tice, if Richard Tice wants to spend his entire time out of Parliament running a small party and coming second in seats, which appears to be how he'd like to spend his political career, he can do that until his political career is finished and someone else takes over doing that. He's robbed himself and probably other people of the chance to be in Parliament and actually make his view count. And that possibly is the point, because lots of the time their ideas are oppositional and don't work in power anyway.
So looking at the most recent YouGov poll, the Reform Party polling 6%.
Massive.
But it's taking, of the 2019 Tory vote, 13% of that Tory vote is going to Reform. 15% is going to the Labour Party. So it's not insignificant.
Oh, and it could score more. I mean, it might score more. I don't doubt that there are, there's a real demographic represented by these people and a real point of view. It's just not big enough.
But why do we only get this discussion off to the right? You never get this discussion. You never say, oh, Corbyn could go off. He could set up a kind of left-wing party that'll take 4 or 5%, with the Green Party. So we all advise Labour to cosy up to them. We don't say that. It only ever happens with this kind of conception of how you have essentially to placate people off to the far right of British politics. That's been the pattern in the course of the last 20 years. And I think it's pernicious. I think it's pernicious for the Tory party. I think the Tory party loses more off to the other end than it gains from placating these people.
That's certainly my...
Now, having said that, do I have the evidence to back it up? Not immediately.
But certainly that is my theory, although, by the way, there's more support for a party of the Reform kind than there is, I think, for a party of the Corbyn type, and it represents a bigger demographic. That's the reason why it's a bigger conversation. But, of course, there is a political party that splits the vote of the Labour Party and has 6%, and they're called the Liberal Democrats. And I've long argued that party's after the coalition completely pointless, and that it's because it can only see itself in coalition with the Labour Party. I can't understand what it thinks it's doing, or why what it's attempting to achieve, as it doesn't seem to me to have anything that I can put my finger on that's all that significantly different from Labour.
I've never understood this view of yours in one way, the way you hold it, because remind me of how you started off in politics.
No, that's why I think it. That's precisely why.
But you were in the SDP.
I was in the national executive of the SDP, and I ran for Parliament. After that party collapsed, ending up in competition with the monster raving loony party for support in the Bootle by-election, it was forced upon me in my late 20s and early 30s to realise in a two-party political system you need a broad coalition. It's from that I take that view.
No,
David.
but you hadn't wanted to be that, and at the stage when you were in the SDP, millions of other people hadn't wanted to be that, and so I mean, it is something for somebody who supports our current voting system. I think it's a little bit cheeky, to be honest, to tell people they're wasting their time.
Well, they are. I'm not telling
them
that.
I'm
just observing it.
When they don't
ignore me. I'm not telling them they're not allowed to.
No. But no, you're telling them they're wasting their time when they don't want to be the thing that you say that they would need to be.
Well, if it would help, they're not wasting their time. That doesn't. What I say doesn't alter whether they're wasting their time or not. It's just my observation on it. It doesn't alter the fact of it.
I thought it was also an element of judgment.
Well, it's my opinion that it's my observation that they're doing that. I don't.
No, an element of judgment in the sense of it's not the right thing.
Well, let's whether or not they're wasting their time.
It depends what they want to achieve.
We are running out of time, so we'll continue the conversation in a moment. We'll talk about all of David's favourite things. Should Meghan wear an armband? I think it's probably basically what you want to talk about, isn't it? It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio. We are still joined by Finkelvitch, Daniel Finkelstein and David Aaronovitch. Let's talk about whether or not we need to hear more from government ministers. The Daily Mirror has reported that ministers will not be doing the daily morning round. They will only be offered to broadcasters 3 mornings a week, which means we're going to miss out on illuminating, riveting interventions like this from Therese Coffey speaking to Times Radio the other day about the prospect of a progress on a deal at Stormont.
It is regrettable that we're in this situation. I know the government and my friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Chris Heaton-Harris in particular, has been trying to bring the parties together. It has had full attention from the previous Prime Minister in trying to make this happen.
Even she sounds bored at the sound of her own voice. Does it matter, David? Do we need to hear from ministers?
It's a really interesting question you raised. I'm just writing a review of Sebastian Payne's account of the fall of Boris Johnson. And one of the things that strikes you is the very mixed blessing that ministers going on programmes can represent at times of crisis. Because, firstly, if a crisis is moving very quickly, they effectively belie themselves within hours, so they look like prize idiots and so on. And then they get cross about being made to look like prize idiots.
Which makes the whole thing even worse.
which makes the whole thing even worse. So on the one hand, you have this kind of the fact that as somebody takes lines to be given from Number 10. They don't really have an ability to kind of evaluate before they go on all these programmes, repeats them, sounds like a bit of an idiot because actually they don't know what they're talking about. And so it's just a kind of straight badge. You just don't want the ball to get onto the wicket at all, etc. But on the other hand, there's the other thing in politics, which I'm very much in favour, which is the old adage from Bill Clinton, never stop explaining and never stop arguing. In other words, continuously be there to put your case, because if you stop doing that, etc., then you stop engaging, and a different kind of thing happens. So I think what I would say is, if only they could have the confidence to, yes, go on, but also state areas of uncertainty or problem, and we were prepared to accept uncertainty, that would be the sweet spot. But until you get there, it can be a very mixed blessing.
Is it also partly the media's fault, Danny? On this morning round, we get the working pension sector, and they just get shouted at about the trains, and the Transport Secretary comes on and gets shouted at about GP appointments. And it just becomes an exercise in people having to account for things which are not their responsibility.
No, I don't think it is. I think you've got to ask the government ministers the questions for which they're collectively responsible, and that's fine. I personally would swap a few longer, more detailed, more rigorous interviews for these constant kind of snacking, as it were, personally, in terms of information, and it would also allow us to take a more strategic view about what the government's doing. But I suspect we won't get that swap. So, I think I'd be resistant to losing any access to government ministers, because you probably won't get it in the form of another. But if we could come to some accord with government, yes, we don't do these things, people don't find them satisfying, you don't find them useful, but let's have a few longer, more strategic interviews, and you won't avoid those things, then I think you learn more out of that.
And in fact, we've had an occasional series on the show called Asking Cabinet Ministers About Their Brief, and actually it's been quite, whether it's on transport or schools, it's actually been
Radical.
Radical. Right, before we go, because I know you're desperate to talk about it, David, should Meghan wear an armband?
No, I wanted to just put this question out there, and we don't really have long enough to do it. I notice she's just won this award, which, as far as I can tell, is just given by one of the members of the Kennedy family, kind of, sort of great persons of the century for combating race in the royal family. Got a lot of people very cross, not least on our own pages and so on. And the point I want to put is this: Meghan Markle is of no actual importance whatsoever. She isn't. Just like Prince Harry is pretty much of no actual importance whatsoever. He just isn't. He's never going to get to the throne. He's nowhere kind of close. Yet there is a psychological need we appear to have for this kind of drama and for this kind of person to work us up into incredible lathers, despite the fact it doesn't matter. And what I'm asking is, what function is that? What's it actually doing for you, Danny?
No or yes. That's my answer to that question.